What if I told you that the entire fate of a nation, and perhaps all of humanity, hinged on a single speech given by a man who would never set foot in the land he spent 40 years fighting to reach? Picture this: the eastern banks of the Jordan River, a sea of tents stretching across the plains of Moab, and an elderly prophet with fire still burning in his eyes, knowing his days are numbered. Moses, the man who split seas, brought down plagues, and spoke with God face to face, stands before a generation that never witnessed Egypt's horrors or Sinai's thunder. They're restless, eager to cross the river and claim their inheritance, but Moses knows something they don't. Without understanding where they came from and why these laws exist, they're doomed to repeat their father's failures. This isn't just another religious sermon. This is the most critical briefing in human history, a covenant renewal that will determine whether Israel becomes a light to the nations or vanishes into the dust of forgotten civilizations. Welcome to Deuteronomy, the book that's equal parts history lesson, legal constitution, and prophetic warning. And it all begins with a journey that should have taken 11 days, but lasted 40 years. Moses stood before the people on the eastern side of the Jordan River in the land of Moab. It was the first day of the 11th month in the 40th year since they left Egypt. The old prophet looked at the faces before him, a generation that hadn't seen the plagues or walked through the Red Sea on dry ground. These were the children of those who had died in the wilderness. Moses began to speak, and his words in chapter 1, verse 3, tell us that he declared to them everything the Lord had commanded him concerning them. He took them back to a mountain they had never seen. The story started at Horeb, the mountain of God. Moses reminded them of what the Lord had said in verses 6 and 7. You have stayed long enough at this mountain. Break camp and advance into the hill country of the Amorites. Go to all the neighboring peoples in the Arabah, in the mountains, in the western foothills, in the Negev and along the coast, to the land of the Canaanites and to Lebanon, as far as the great river, the Euphrates. The promise was clear. In verse 8, God had declared, See, I have given you this land. Go in and take possession of the land the Lord swore he would give to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to their descendants after them. The land was already theirs. They just needed to walk in and claim it. But Moses knew that leading so many people was too much for one man. He told them what he'd said back then, recorded in verses 9 through 11. At that time I said to you, you are too heavy a burden for me to carry alone. The Lord your God has increased your numbers, so that today you are as numerous as the stars in the sky. May the Lord, the God of your ancestors, increase you 1,000 times and bless you as he has promised. So they organized. Moses instructed them to choose wise and respected men from each tribe. The people agreed it was a good plan. From each tribe, they selected leaders, commanders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. Moses charged these judges in verses 16 and 17 with clear instructions. Hear the disputes between your people and judge fairly, whether the case is between two Israelites or between an Israelite and a foreigner residing among you. Do not show partiality in judging. Hear both small and great alike. Do not be afraid of anyone, for judgment belongs to God. Everything was set. The destination was clear. Leadership was in place. The journey from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea should have been simple. Just 11 days through the desert, as Moses noted in verse 2. 11 days separated them from the edge of their inheritance. But standing there in Moab, 40 years later, Moses knew what went wrong at Kadesh Barnea. That's where the story took a dark turn. They arrived at Kadesh Barnea, and Moses reminded them of what he said back then. In verse 21, he had told them, See, the Lord your God has given you the land. Go up and take possession of it, as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, told you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. The land was right there, waiting for them. But the people weren't so sure. They came to Moses with a proposal in verse 22. Let us send men ahead to spy out the land for us and bring back a report about the route we are to take and the towns we will come to." Moses thought it was a good idea, so he selected 12 men, one from each tribe. The spies went into the hill country, reached the valley of Eshcol, and brought back fruit from the land. Their report in verse 25 seemed positive at first. "It is a good land that the Lord our God is giving us." But that's not the whole story they told the people. The people heard about the giants. They heard about the fortified cities with walls reaching to the sky. They heard about the Anakites, descendants of giants who made them feel like grasshoppers, and fear gripped their hearts. Moses recalled their response in verse 26, "But you were unwilling to go up. You rebelled against the command of the Lord your God." In their tents, they grumbled. Verse 27 records their bitter words. "The Lord hates us, so he brought us out of Egypt to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us." They accused God of hatred. They twisted his deliverance into a death trap. They asked where they could go, saying their brothers had made their hearts melt with fear by reporting that the people there were stronger and taller, with cities that had walls up to the sky, and that they had even seen the Anakites there. Moses tried to encourage them. He said in verses 29 through 30, "Do not be terrified, do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God, who is going before you, will fight for you, as he did for you in Egypt, before your very eyes." He reminded them of the wilderness journey, how in verse 31 God had carried them as a father carries his son all the way you went until you reached this place. But it didn't matter. Verse 32 tells us the heartbreaking truth. In spite of this, you did not trust in the Lord your God. After everything they'd seen, the plagues, the Red Sea, the manna, the water from the rock, they still didn't believe he could give them the land. The Lord heard their grumbling, and he was angry. His judgment came swiftly in verses 34 and 35. "Not one of you from this evil generation shall see the good land I swore to give your ancestors." The only exceptions were Caleb, who had followed the Lord wholeheartedly, and Joshua, who would lead the next generation across. When the people heard this, they suddenly changed their minds. They decided to go up and fight after all. But Moses warned them in verse 42 that the Lord had said, "Do not go up and fight, because I will not be with you. You will be defeated by your enemies." They didn't listen. They went anyway, and verse 44 describes what happened. "The Amorites who lived in those hills came out against you. They chased you like a swarm of bees and beat you down from Seir all the way to Hormah. They came back weeping before the Lord." But verse 45 says, "The Lord paid no attention to your weeping and turned a deaf ear to you." They stayed in Kadesh for a long time. An 11-day journey had just become a 40-year sentence. After the disaster at Kadesh, the people turned back toward the wilderness. Moses told them in chapter 2, verse 1, "Then we turned back and set out toward the wilderness along the route to the Red Sea, as the Lord had directed me. For a long time we made our way around the hill country of Seir." Finally, the Lord spoke to Moses again. In verse 3 he said, "You have made your way around this hill country long enough. Now turn north." They were going to pass through the territory of their relatives, the descendants of Esau who lived in Seir. God gave Moses specific instructions in verses 4 and 5. "You are about to pass through the territory of your relatives, the descendants of Esau who live in Seir. They will be afraid of you, but be very careful. Do not provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land, not even enough to put your foot on. I have given Esau the hill country of Seir as his own." This was important. Not all land was theirs to take. God had given Seir to Esau's descendants, and Israel had to respect that. Verse 6 continues, "You are to pay them in silver for the food you eat and the water you drink." They weren't raiders or conquerors here. They were travelers passing through, buying what they needed. Moses reminded them why they could afford to buy provisions. Verse 7 says, "The Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hands. He has watched over your journey through this vast wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you, and you have not lacked anything. Even in judgment, even in the wilderness, God provided. Their clothes didn't wear out, their feet didn't swell. They had everything they needed. They moved on from their relatives and traveled along the desert road, away from Elath and Etzion-Geber. Then the Lord gave Moses another instruction in verse 9. Do not harass the Moabites or provoke them to war, for I will not give you any part of their land. I have given Ar to the descendants of Lot as a possession. The Moabites were distant relatives through Lot, Abraham's nephew, and their land was off limits too. The pattern repeated when they approached the Ammonites. In verse 19, God said, When you come to the Ammonites, do not harass them or provoke them to war, for I will not give you possession of any land belonging to the Ammonites. I have given it as a possession to the descendants of Lot. Israel had to learn that God's promises were specific. Their inheritance was Canaan, not every piece of land they passed through. So they traveled, buying food and water, respecting boundaries, moving toward their destination. 40 years of wandering, yet God's hand was on them the entire time. The older generation was passing away, but their children were being prepared. The wilderness wasn't just punishment, it was also training ground. Everything changed when they reached the Arnon Gorge. Moses sent messengers from the wilderness of Kedemoth to Sihon, king of Heshbon. The message in verses 26 through 28 was simple and peaceful. Let us pass through your country. We will stay on the main road. We will not turn aside to the right or to the left. Sell us food to eat and water to drink for their price in silver. Only let us pass through on foot, as the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir, and the Moabites, who live in Ar, did for us, until we cross the Jordan into the land the Lord our God is giving us. But Sihon refused. Verse 30 explains why. But Sihon, king of Heshbon, refused to let us pass through, for the Lord your God had made his spirit stubborn and his heart obstinate, in order to give him into your hands, as he has now done. This wasn't just political stubbornness, this was divine orchestration. Sihon mobilized his entire army and came out to fight at Jahaz. The Lord told Moses in verse 31, See, I have begun to deliver Sihon and his country over to you. Now begin to conquer and possess his land. And that's exactly what happened. Verse 33 records the victory. The Lord our God delivered him over to us, and we struck him down, together with his sons and his whole army. They captured all his towns and completely destroyed them, men, women, and children. Only the livestock and plunder from the towns did they keep for themselves. From Aroer on the rim of the Arnon Gorge to Gilead, verse 36 says, Not one town was too strong for us. The Lord our God gave us all of them. Next came Og, king of Bashan. This was no ordinary opponent. The people of that time knew Og as one of the last of the Rephates, a race of giants. As they turned and went up along the road toward Bashan, Og and his whole army came out to meet them in battle at Edrei. But the Lord said to Moses in chapter 3, verse 2, Do not be afraid of him, for I have delivered him into your hands, along with his whole army and his land. Do to him what you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon. Verse 3 describes what happened next. So the Lord our God also gave into our hands Og, king of Bashan, and all his army. We struck them down, leaving no survivors. They took all his cities, 60 in all, the whole region of Argob in Bashan. These weren't small villages. Verse 5 tells us, All these cities were fortified with high walls and with gates and bars, and there were also a great many unwalled villages. They conquered them all. Moses made a point about Og in verses 11, describing his bed. Og, king of Bashan, was the last of the Rephates. His bed was decorated with iron and was more than 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. This giant of a man, with his iron bed, fell before Israel just as easily as Sihon had. When God fights for his people, walls don't matter, giants don't matter, fortified cities don't matter. The land they conquered was substantial. Moses gave it to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. In verses 12 through 13, he described the distribution of the land that we took over at that time. I gave the Reubenites and the Gadites the territory north of Aroer by the Arnon Gorge, including half the hill country of Gilead, together with its towns, the rest of Gilead, and also all of Bashan, the kingdom of Og, I gave to the half-tribe of Manasseh. This was the first portion of the promised land secured, not across the Jordan yet, but real territory nonetheless. The conquest had begun, and God had proven that no enemy was too strong for him to defeat. With the land east of the Jordan divided, Moses gave instructions to the tribes settling there. He commanded Joshua in verse 21 of chapter 3, "You have seen with your own eyes all that the Lord your God has done to these two kings. The Lord will do the same to all the kingdoms over there where you are going." Then Moses added the encouragement in verse 22, "Do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God himself will fight for you." But as Moses spoke to Joshua about crossing over, something deeply personal weighed on his heart. At that time, verse 23 says, "I pleaded with the Lord." Moses begged God for something he wanted more than anything. His plea in verses 24 and 25 was raw and honest. "Sovereign Lord, you have begun to show to your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do the deeds and mighty works you do? Let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that fine hill country in Lebanon." Moses had led these people for 40 years. He'd stood up to Pharaoh, raised his staff over the Red Sea, climbed Mount Sinai, interceded when God wanted to destroy the nation, dealt with their complaints, organized their camps, and taught them God's laws. He'd come so far. The land was right there, just across the river. All he asked was to see it, to walk on it, to experience what he'd been pointing them toward for 4 decades. But verse 26 contains one of the saddest lines in Scripture. "But because of you, the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me." God's answer was firm. "That is enough. Do not speak to me anymore about this matter." The door was closed. The decision was final. No amount of pleading would change it. Still, God gave Moses something. Verse 27 records the consolation. "Go up to the top of Pisgah and look west and north and south and east. Look at the land with your own eyes, since you are not going to cross this Jordan." Moses could see it, but he couldn't enter it. He could look at the hills, the valleys, the cities, the land flowing with milk and honey, but only from a distance. Then came the transfer of leadership. God told Moses in verse 28, "But commission Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he will lead this people across and will cause them to inherit the land that you will see." Joshua would finish what Moses started. Joshua would plant his feet on the soil Moses could only view from a mountaintop. The torch was passing to a new generation, and Moses had to accept it. They stayed in the valley near Beth Peor, waiting for the moment when Joshua would lead them across. Moses had pleaded his case and received his answer. Now he had to prepare the people for life without him, to make sure they understood what God expected, to ensure they didn't repeat the failures of their parents. The personal disappointment was crushing, but the mission continued. Moses would use his remaining time to teach, to warn, to remind them of everything that mattered. Moses shifted from history to instruction. In chapter 4, verse 1, he called out, "Now Israel, hear the decrees and laws I am about to teach you. Follow them, so that you may live, and may go in and take possession of the land the Lord, the God of your ancestors, is giving you." Their survival in the land depended on obedience. This wasn't optional. It was existential. Then came a crucial command in verse 2. "Do not add to what I command you, and do not subtract from it, but keep the commands of the Lord your God that I give you." The law was complete. Nothing needed to be added to make it more holy, and nothing could be removed to make it more convenient. They had to take it exactly as God gave it. Moses immediately gave them a reason to listen. He reminded them of something recent, something they all witnessed. Verse 3 says, "You saw with your own eyes what the Lord did at Baal Peor. The Lord your God destroyed from among you everyone who followed the Baal of Peor." This wasn't ancient history. This had just happened. Some of the men had been seduced by Moabite women into worshipping Baal, and a plague broke out. 24,000 people died because they turned away from God. The contrast was stark. Verse 4 declares, "But all of you who held fast to the Lord your God are still alive today." Those who stayed faithful were standing right there, breathing, living, ready to enter the land. The lesson was clear: obedience brings life, disobedience brings death. Moses told them in verses 5 and 6, "See, I have taught you decrees and laws as the Lord my God commanded me, so that you may follow them in the land you are entering to take possession of it. Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations, who will hear about all these decrees and say, 'Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people.'" Their obedience wasn't just for their benefit, it was their witness to the world. Other nations would look at Israel and see something different, something better, something wise. Moses had given them the tools. The instructions were clear. The recent example at Baal Peor proved the stakes were real. Now they needed to choose whether they would add to God's commands, subtract from them, or simply obey them as given. Their future depended on that choice. Moses asked them a question that put everything in perspective. Verse 7 says, "What other nation is so great as to have their gods near them the way the Lord our God is near us whenever we pray to him?" Think about it. Every nation had their gods, statues of wood and stone, images of animals and monsters, distant deities who demanded sacrifices but never responded. But Israel, they had a God who listened, who answered, who was present. Then Moses asked another question in verse 8. "And what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws as this body of laws I am setting before you today?" Other nations had laws, sure, laws that favored the rich, laws that crushed the poor, laws that served the powerful. But these laws from God, they were different. They were just. They protected the widow, the orphan, the foreigner. They demanded honest weights and fair treatment. They created a society unlike anything the ancient world had seen. But with this privilege came responsibility. Moses warned them in verses 9 and 10, "Only be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. Remember the day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when he said to me, 'Assemble the people before me to hear my words, so that they may learn to revere me as long as they live in the land, and may teach them to their children.'" That day at Horeb was unlike anything before or since. Verses 11 and 12 paint the picture. "You came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, while it blazed with fire to the very heavens, with black clouds and deep darkness. Then the Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words but saw no form. There was only a voice." This was the defining moment of their national identity. God spoke directly to them, not to Moses alone, but to all of them. The mountain shook. Fire blazed, darkness covered the peak, and from the midst of it all, God's voice thundered his covenant. Moses reminded them of what happened next in verse 13. "He declared to you his covenant, the 10 Commandments, which he commanded you to follow, and then wrote them on 2 stone tablets. God himself wrote these words. His finger etched them in stone." This wasn't human wisdom or Moses' ideas. This was direct revelation from the creator of the universe. Verse 14 continues, And the Lord directed me at that time to teach you the decrees and laws you are to follow in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. Moses was the mediator, the teacher, the one who explained what God meant. But the words came from God. Then Moses drove home a critical point about that day. He said in verse 15, "You saw no form of any kind the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. Therefore watch yourselves very carefully. Why did God reveal himself as a voice without a form? Why didn't they see an image?" The answer comes in the warning of verses 16 through 19. Don't make any idol or image representing God. Not a statue of a man or woman, not an animal, not a bird, not a creature that crawls, not a fish. Don't look up at the sky and be drawn to worship the sun, moon, or stars, even though God assigned them to all the nations under heaven. But verse 20 makes the distinction clear. But as for you, the Lord took you and brought you out of the iron-smelting furnace, out of Egypt, to be the people of his inheritance, as you now are. Egypt was like a furnace that refines metal, intense, painful, purifying. God brought them through it for a purpose. They weren't like other nations. They were chosen, set apart, given a unique relationship with the one true God. That was their identity, their calling, their reason for existence. No other nation could claim this. No other people had heard God's voice and lived to tell about it. Moses turned to the future, to what would happen after they crossed the Jordan. He spoke with the weight of someone who knew he wouldn't be there to guide them. Verse 25 begins his warning. After you have had children and grandchildren and have lived in the land a long time, if you then become corrupt and make any kind of idol, doing evil in the eyes of the Lord your God and arousing his anger. This wasn't a hypothetical. Moses knew human nature. He knew that prosperity breeds forgetfulness. The consequences would be severe. Verse 26 says, I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you this day, that you will quickly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. You will not live there long, but will certainly be destroyed. Heaven and earth stood as eternal witnesses to this covenant. If they broke it, they wouldn't last long in the land. Verse 27 continues the grim prophecy. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and only a few of you will survive among the nations to which the Lord will drive you. Exile, dispersion, becoming refugees among foreign peoples. This was what disobedience would bring. And in those foreign lands, verse 28 says, there you will worship man-made gods of wood and stone, which cannot see or hear or eat or smell. The irony was brutal. They would abandon the living God who delivered them and end up bowing before lifeless idols that couldn't do anything. Statues that had eyes but couldn't see, ears but couldn't hear, mouths but couldn't eat. They would trade everything for nothing. But even in exile, hope remained. Verses 29 and 30 offer a way back. But if from there you seek the Lord your God, you will find him if you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. When you are in distress and all these things have happened to you, then in later days you will return to the Lord your God and obey him. God's mercy was greater than their rebellion. Even after judgment, even in exile, if they turned back to him with their whole heart, he would be there. Verse 31 gives the reason, for the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon or destroy you or forget the covenant with your ancestors, which he confirmed to them by oath. The promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob still stood. God's character didn't change. His mercy endured. His covenant remained firm. Then Moses brought them back to the bigger picture. He asked them in verse 32, ask now about the former days, long before your time, from the day God created human beings on the earth. Ask from one end of the heavens to the other. Has anything so great as this ever happened, or has anything like it ever been heard of? Search all of history. Look everywhere. You won't find anything like what happened to Israel. Verse 33 poses another question. Has any other people heard the voice of God speaking out of fire as you have and lived? The answer was obvious. No. People who encountered God's full glory died. But Israel heard his voice from the fire at Horeb and survived. That was unprecedented. Verse 34 continues, has any God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another nation, by testings, by signs and wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, or by great and awesome deeds, like all the things the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes? No other God had done this, because no other God existed with this kind of power. The plagues, the Red Sea crossing, the defeat of Pharaoh's army, these weren't myths or legends. These people saw it with their own eyes. Why did God do all this? Verse 35 gives the answer. You were shown these things so that you might know that the Lord is God. Besides him, there is no other. This was the point of everything, not to make them feel special, not to give them a good story to tell, but to demonstrate that the Lord alone is God. There are no rivals, no competitors, no other divine beings with real power, just him. Chapter 5 begins to transition, but Moses had one more reminder about Mount Horeb. In verses 2 and 3 he said, "The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It was not with our ancestors that the Lord made this covenant, but with us, with all of us who are alive here today." Even though most of the people standing there hadn't been adults at Horeb, the covenant applied to them. It wasn't just for their parents, it was for them, for their children, for every generation that would follow. Moses then recounted how terrified the people were that day. In verse 5 he explained, "At that time I stood between the Lord and you to declare to you the word of the Lord, because you were afraid of the fire and did not go up the mountain." The people heard God's voice and thought they would die. They begged Moses to be the mediator, to hear from God, and then tell them what he said. They couldn't handle the direct encounter. Now, 40 years later, standing on the edge of the Promised Land, Moses reminded this new generation of everything their parents experienced and everything they themselves had been given. They had a God who was near. They had laws that were righteous. They had witnessed miracles no other nation could claim. They had been carried through the wilderness like a father carries his son. Their clothes hadn't worn out, their feet hadn't swollen. They'd defeated giant kings and fortified cities. Everything was ready. The land waited across the river. All they had to do was remember, obey, and trust the God who had brought them this far. Moses needed to make something absolutely clear before they crossed into Canaan. He started chapter 9 with a stark reality check in verse 1. "Hear, Israel, you are now about to cross the Jordan to go in and dispossess nations greater and stronger than you, with large cities that have walls up to the sky." The enemies waiting for them were formidable. But verse 2 continued, "The people are strong and tall, Anakites, you know about them, and have heard it said, 'Who can stand up against the Anakites?'" But Moses assured them in verse 3, "Be assured today that the Lord your God is the one who goes across ahead of you like a devouring fire. He will destroy them. He will subdue them before you, and you will drive them out and annihilate them quickly, as the Lord has promised you." God would go before them like fire that consumes everything in its path. Then Moses addressed what he knew they might be thinking. After they won these battles, they might pat themselves on the back. So verse 4 gives the warning, "After the Lord your God has driven them out before you, do not say to yourself, 'The Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness.' No, it is on account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you." Moses hammered this point home in verse 5. "It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you are going in to take possession of their land, But on account of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God will drive them out before you, to accomplish what he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. 2 reasons, and neither was Israel's goodness. First, the Canaanite nations had filled up their measure of sin. Second, God was keeping his promises to the patriarchs. Then Moses said something brutally honest in verse 6. Understand then that it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people. Stiff-necked meant stubborn, rebellious, unwilling to bend. He told them in verse 7, remember this and never forget how you aroused the anger of the Lord your God in the wilderness. From the day you left Egypt until you arrived here, you have been rebellious against the Lord. Moses took them back to the lowest point in their history. He said in verse 8, at Horeb, you aroused the Lord's wrath so that he was angry enough to destroy you. This happened at the very mountain where God gave them the covenant. Moses reminded them of the timeline in verse 9, when I went up on the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant that the Lord had made with you. I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. I ate no bread and drank no water. Then verse 10 continues, the Lord gave me 2 tablets of stone, inscribed by the finger of God. On them were all the commandments the Lord proclaimed to you on the mountain out of the fire, on the day of the assembly. These weren't human documents. God himself wrote these words on stone. At the end of 40 days, God told Moses something devastating. Verse 12 records his words, go down from here at once, because your people, whom you brought out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have turned away quickly from what I commanded them and have made an idol for themselves. Notice God said, your people, as if distancing himself from them. Verse 13 shows how angry God was. And the Lord said to me, I have seen this people, and they are a stiff-necked people indeed. Let me alone, so that I may destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven, and I will make you into a nation stronger and more numerous than they. God was ready to start over with Moses alone. Moses came down the mountain. Verse 15 describes the scene. So I turned and went down from the mountain while it was ablaze with fire, and the 2 tablets of the covenant were in my hands. Then he saw it. Verse 16 says, when I looked, I saw that you had sinned against the Lord your God. You had made for yourselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. You had turned aside quickly from the way that the Lord had commanded you. Moses' response was immediate. Verse 17 tells us, so I took the 2 tablets and threw them out of my hands, breaking them to pieces before your eyes. The covenant was shattered, literally. What Moses did next saved their lives. Verse 18 says, then once again I fell prostrate before the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights. I ate no bread and drank no water because of all the sin you had committed, doing what was evil in the Lord's sight and so arousing his anger. Another 40 days, another fast. Moses threw himself between God's wrath and the people. Verse 19 reveals Moses' fear. I feared the anger and wrath of the Lord, for he was angry enough with you to destroy you. But again the Lord listened to me. Even Aaron wasn't safe. Verse 20 says, and the Lord was angry enough with Aaron to destroy him, but at that time I prayed for Aaron too. Moses dealt with the idol itself. Verse 21 describes what he did. Also, I took that sinful thing of yours, the calf you had made, and burned it in the fire. Then I crushed it and ground it to powder as fine as dust, and threw the dust into a stream that flowed down the mountain. The golden calf was completely destroyed. Moses summarized their history in verse 24. You have been rebellious against the Lord ever since I've known you. Yet they were still alive. Why? Because Moses interceded, because God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob still mattered. After the intercession, God gave Moses new instructions. Chapter 10, verse 1 records what the Lord said, At that time the Lord said to me, "Chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones and come up to me on the mountain. Also, make a wooden ark." The covenant would be renewed, but this time Moses had to prepare the tablets himself. Verse 2 continues God's instructions. "I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Then you are to put them in the ark." The same words would be written again. Moses did exactly as commanded. Verse 3 says, "So I made the ark out of acacia wood and chiseled out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I went up on the mountain with the 2 tablets in my hands." Then God kept his promise. Verse 4 tells us, "The Lord wrote on these tablets what he had written before, the 10 commandments he had proclaimed to you on the mountain out of the fire on the day of the assembly, and the Lord gave them to me." God wrote the same commandments again. Moses came down from the mountain and placed the tablets where they belonged. Verse 5 says, "Then I came back down the mountain and put the tablets in the ark I had made, as the Lord commanded me, and they are there now." The ark became the container for the covenant. Moses then explained something important about the tribe of Levi. Verse 8 begins, "At that time the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the covenant of the Lord, to stand before the Lord, to minister and to pronounce blessings in his name, as they still do today." The Levites had a special job. Because of this special calling, verse 9 says, "That is why the Levites have no share or inheritance among their fellow Israelites. The Lord is their inheritance, as the Lord your God told them." While other tribes would get land, the Levites got something better. God himself was their inheritance. Now Moses asked the question that summarized everything. Verse 12 of chapter 10 poses it clearly. "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul?" 5 things, all connected. Fear God, walk in his ways, love him, serve him, and do it all with your whole heart and soul. Verse 13 adds one more thing, "And to observe the Lord's commands and decrees that I am giving you today for your own good." These commands weren't burdens, they were for their benefit. Moses wanted them to understand who they were dealing with. Verse 14 paints the picture. "To the Lord your God belong the heavens, even the highest heavens, the earth and everything in it." God owned everything. Yet verse 15 reveals the mystery. "Yet the Lord set his affection on your ancestors and loved them, and he chose you, their descendants, above all the nations, as it is today." So what should their response be? Verse 16 gives the command, "Circumcise your hearts, therefore, and do not be stiff-necked any longer." Physical circumcision marked them on the outside, but heart circumcision meant removing the stubbornness from the inside. Moses explained why this was so important. Verse 17 declares, "For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes." God wasn't like human judges who could be bought. And verse 18 shows who he cares about. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. The most vulnerable people, orphans, widows, and foreigners, these were the ones God personally defended. Because God loved foreigners, verse 19 commands, "And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt." Remember where you came from. Verse 20 returns to the core relationship. "Fear the Lord your God and serve him. Hold fast to him and take your oaths in his name." Moses reminded them why in verse 21. "He is the one you praise. He is your God, who performed for you those great and awesome wonders you saw with your own eyes." Moses began chapter 11 by commanding them to love the Lord. Then he addressed specifically the generation standing before him in verse 2. "Remember today that your children were not the ones who saw and experienced the discipline of the Lord your God. his majesty, his mighty hand, his outstretched arm. Their children hadn't seen what they'd seen. Verses 3 and 4 list what they saw, the signs he performed and the things he did in the heart of Egypt, both to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his whole country. What he did to the Egyptian army, to its horses and chariots, how he overwhelmed them with the waters of the Red Sea as they were pursuing you, and how the Lord brought lasting ruin on them. Moses concluded in verse 7, "But it was your own eyes that saw all these great things the Lord has done." Not stories passed down. They saw it with their own eyes. Now Moses gave them instructions for when they entered the land. Starting in verse 26, he presented the choice. "See, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse." Two paths, two outcomes. Verse 27 explains the blessing. "The blessing if you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I am giving you today." Simple obedience brings blessing. Verse 28 gives the alternative. "The curse if you disobey the commands of the Lord your God and turn from the way that I command you today by following other gods, which you have not known." Disobedience brings a curse. Then came specific instructions for a ceremony they would perform after crossing the Jordan. Verse 29 says, "When the Lord your God has brought you into the land you are entering to possess, you are to proclaim on Mount Gerizim the blessings and on Mount Ebal the curses." Two mountains, two declarations. Moses began chapter 12 with clear instructions about the land. Verse 1 says, "These are the decrees and laws you must be careful to follow in the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, is giving you to possess, as long as you live in the land." These weren't temporary rules. The first command was about destruction. Verses 2 and 3 spell it out. "Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains, on the hills and under every spreading tree, where the nations you are dispossessing worship their gods. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and burn their Asherah poles in the fire. Cut down the idols of their gods and wipe out their names from those places." Total destruction. No compromise. Then came a crucial contrast in verse 4. "You must not worship the Lord your God in their way." Israel couldn't just replace the pagan gods with the true God at the same locations. Verse 5 explains what they should do instead. "But you are to seek the place the Lord your God will choose from among all your tribes to put his name there for his dwelling. To that place you must go." One central place, not multiple worship sites scattered across the country. Verse 6 lists what they would bring there. There bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts, what you have vowed to give, and your free will offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. Everything went to this central sanctuary, and worship would be joyful. Verse 7 says, "There, in the presence of the Lord your God, you and your families shall eat and shall rejoice in everything you have put your hand to, because the Lord your God has blessed you." This wasn't grim duty, this was celebration. Moses warned them in verse 13, "Be careful not to sacrifice your burnt offerings anywhere you please." The temptation would be strong, but verse 14 gives the rule. "Offer them only at the place the Lord will choose in one of your tribes, and there observe everything I command you." Convenience didn't matter, obedience did. Chapter 13 addresses a serious threat to Israel's faithfulness. Verse 1 sets up the scenario. "If a prophet, or one who foretells by dreams, appears among you and announces to you a sign or wonder," prophets claiming to speak for God would arise. But verse 2 gives the test. "And if the sign or wonder spoken of takes place, and the prophet says, 'Let us follow other gods, gods you have not known, and let us worship them,' the miracle happens. But then the prophet tells them to worship other gods. Verse 3 provides God's answer. "You must not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer. The Lord your God is testing you to find out whether you love him with all your heart and with all your soul. Even genuine miracles don't validate a message that contradicts God's commands. The penalty for false prophets was severe. Verse 5 declares, "That prophet or dreamer must be put to death for inciting rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery." Death. No second chances. Then Moses addressed an even harder situation. Verse 6 presents it. "If your very own brother, or your son or daughter, or the wife you love, or your closest friend secretly entices you, saying, 'Let us go and worship other gods,' gods that neither you nor your ancestors have known," not a stranger, your brother, your child, your spouse, your best friend. God's command in verse 8 is shocking. Do not yield to them or listen to them. Show them no pity. Do not spare them or shield them. Even your closest family member. No pity. Verse 9 explains what must happen. You must certainly put them to death. Your hand must be the first in putting them to death, and then the hands of all the people. The person who was tempted had to throw the first stone. The execution served a purpose beyond punishment. Verse 11 explains, "Then all Israel will hear and be afraid, and no one among you will do such an evil thing again." Public executions sent a message. Moses turned to the annual celebrations that would mark Israel's calendar. Chapter 16 begins with the first and most important feast. Verse 1 commands, "Observe the month of Aviv and celebrate the Passover of the Lord your God, because in the month of Aviv he brought you out of Egypt by night." Passover commemorated that night. Verse 3 connects the feast to their history. "Do not eat it with bread made with yeast, but for 7 days eat unleavened bread, the bread of affliction, because you left Egypt in haste, so that all the days of your life you may remember the time of your departure from Egypt." Unleavened bread reminded them they left quickly. Next came the Feast of Weeks. Verse 9 gives the timing. Count off 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain. Start counting when harvest begins. 7 weeks later, 50 days, another feast would arrive. Verse 10 describes the celebration. "Then celebrate the festival of weeks to the Lord your God, by giving a free will offering in proportion to the blessings the Lord your God has given you. Bring an offering based on how much God blessed your harvest." The third major feast was the Feast of Tabernacles. Verse 13 sets the timing. "Celebrate the Festival of Tabernacles for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your winepress." After harvest was complete, they would celebrate for a full week. Joy was the theme. Verse 14 says, "Be joyful at your festival, you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levites, the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns." Everyone included. Moses then summarized the annual requirement in verse 16. 3 times a year, all your men must appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose. At the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and the festival of tabernacles. No one should appear before the Lord empty-handed. 3 pilgrimages, 3 times every man in Israel would travel to the central sanctuary. Moses turned to how justice would work once they settled in the land. Chapter 16, verse 18, gives the first instruction. "Appoint judges and officials for each of your tribes in every town the Lord your God is giving you, and they shall judge the people fairly." Every town needed judges. Justice had to be local and accessible. The standard was clear in verse 19. "Do not pervert justice or show partiality. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the innocent." 3 things judges must never do: twist justice, favor one person, or take money to change their verdict. Verse 20 emphasizes the goal: follow justice and justice alone, so that you may live and possess the land the Lord your God is giving you. Then Moses addressed serious crimes. Chapter 17, verse 6 establishes a crucial principle. On the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a person is to be put to death, but no one is to be put to death on the testimony of only 1 witness. 1 witness wasn't enough for capital punishment. Verse 7 adds another detail. The hands of the witnesses must be the first in putting that person to death, and then the hands of all the people. You must purge the evil from among you. Or the witnesses had to participate in the execution. Some cases would be too difficult for local judges. Verse 8 describes these situations. If cases come before your courts that are too difficult for you to judge, whether bloodshed, lawsuits, or assaults, take them to the place the Lord your God will choose. Verse 9 explains who would handle these cases. Go to the Levitical priests and to the judge who is in office at that time. Inquire of them, and they will give you the verdict. And their decision was final. Verse 10 says, you must act according to the decisions they give you at the place the Lord will choose. Be careful to do everything they direct you to do. The penalty for rejecting the court's decision was severe. Verse 12 declares, anyone who shows contempt for the judge or for the priest who stands ministering there to the Lord your God is to be put to death. You must purge the evil from Israel. Moses knew that eventually Israel would want a king. Verse 14 of chapter 17 describes the scenario. When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you and have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, let us set a king over us like all the nations around us. God wouldn't stop them from having a king, but he had conditions. Verse 15 begins, be sure to appoint over you a king the Lord your God chooses. He must be from among your fellow Israelites. Do not place a foreigner over you, one who is not an Israelite. The king had to be an Israelite chosen by God. Then came specific restrictions. Verse 16 states the first one. The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more horses, for the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. Horses represented military power and trust in human strength rather than God. The second restriction came in verse 17. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. Multiple wives meant political alliances and divided loyalties. The same verse continues with the third restriction. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. Wealth corrupts. A king drowning in gold starts trusting his treasury instead of God. But the most important requirement wasn't what the king couldn't do, it was what he must do. Verse 18 gives the command. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law, taken from that of the Levitical priests. The king had to make his own copy of God's law, not hire a scribe. Write it himself, word by word. Verse 19 explains why. It is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God, and follow carefully all the words of this law and these decrees. Daily reading would teach him to fear God and obey his commands. The purpose was clear in verse 20, and not consider himself better than his fellow Israelites, and turn from the law to the right or to the left. Then he and his descendants will reign a long time over his kingdom in Israel. Chapter 18 begins by addressing the Levitical priests. Verse 1 states their unique situation. The Levitical priests, indeed the whole tribe of Levi, are to have no allotment or inheritance with Israel. They shall live on the food offerings presented to the Lord, for that is their inheritance. No land, no fields. The Levites received portions from the sacrifices instead. Verse 2 emphasizes this again. They shall have no inheritance among their fellow Israelites. The Lord is their inheritance as he promised them. God himself was their inheritance. Verse 3 explains their portion. This is the share due the priests from the people who sacrifice a bull or a sheep, the shoulder, the internal organs, and the meat from the head. When someone brought an animal sacrifice, these specific parts went to the priests. Verse 4 adds more provisions. You are to give them the first fruits of your grain, new wine and olive oil, and the first wool from the shearing of your sheep. The first and best went to the Levites. Verse 5 gives the reason. For the Lord your God has chosen them and their descendants out of all your tribes to stand and minister in the Lord's name always. Then Moses addressed the abominations of the Canaanite nations. Verse 9 warns, when you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations there. Verses 10 and 11 list these practices. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. Child sacrifice, fortune-telling, witchcraft, all forbidden. Verse 12 explains why. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. These were the very reasons God was removing the Canaanites. But Israel wouldn't be left without guidance. Verse 15 contains one of the most important prophecies. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him. A prophet like Moses would come. Verse 18 has God speaking directly. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites, and I will put my words in his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. This prophet would speak God's exact words. Verse 19 gives a solemn warning. I myself will call to account anyone who does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name. But what about false prophets? Verse 20 addresses them. But a prophet who presumes to speak in my name anything I have not commanded, or a prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, is to be put to death. False prophecy carried the death penalty. Verse 22 gives the test. If what a prophet proclaims in the name of the Lord does not take place or come true, that is a message the Lord has not spoken. That prophet has spoken presumptuously, so do not be alarmed. Nizin, chapter 19, addresses what happens when someone accidentally kills another person. After the Lord gives them the land, verse 2 gives the instruction, then set aside for yourselves 3 cities in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess. 3 special cities would serve as places of refuge. Verse 3 explains the purpose. Determine the distances involved and divide into 3 parts the land the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, so that a person who kills someone may flee for refuge to one of these cities. The cities had to be strategically located. Verse 4 describes who could use these cities. This is the rule concerning anyone who kills a person and flees there for safety, anyone who kills a neighbor unintentionally, without malice aforethought. Accidental killings only. Verse 5 gives an example. For instance, a man may go into the forest with his neighbor to cut wood, and as he swings his axe to fell a tree, the head may fly off and hit his neighbor and kill him. That man may flee to one of these cities and save his life. That's where the cities of refuge mattered. Verse 6 explains, otherwise, the avenger of blood might pursue him in a rage, overtake him if the distance is too great, and kill him even though he is not deserving of death, since he did it to his neighbor without malice aforethought. Family members had the right to avenge their relative's death, but cities of refuge didn't protect actual murderers. Verse 11 draws the line, but if out of hate someone lies in wait, assaults and kills a neighbor, and then flees to one of these cities. This was premeditated murder. Verse 12 explains what happens. The killer shall be sent for by the town elders, be brought back from the city, and be handed over to the avenger of blood to die. Moses then turned to property boundaries. Verse 14 addresses a serious crime. Do not move your neighbor's boundary stone, set up by your predecessors in the inheritance you receive in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess. Moving these stones was theft, stealing land by deception. The laws about witnesses came next. Verse 15 restates the principle: one witness is not enough to convict anyone accused of any crime or offense they may have committed. A matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. But what about false witnesses? Verse 16 describes the problem. If a malicious witness takes the stand to accuse someone of a crime. Verse 18 continues, the judges must make a thorough investigation, and if the witness proves to be a liar, giving false testimony against a fellow Israelite. Verse 19 spells out the penalty. Then do to the false witness as that witness intended to do to the other party. You must purge the evil from among you. Whatever punishment the false witness wanted, that same punishment falls on them. Chapter 20 addresses how Israel should conduct warfare. Verse 1 sets the scene. When you go to war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army greater than yours, do not be afraid of them, because the Lord your God, who brought you up out of Egypt, will be with you. Superior enemy forces didn't matter. Before battle, something important happened. Verse 2 says, when you are about to go into battle, the priest shall come forward and address the army. Verses 3 and 4 record what the priest would say. He shall say, hear Israel, today you are going into battle against your enemies. Do not be faint-hearted or afraid. Do not panic or be terrified by them. For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to give you victory. Then the officers addressed practical matters. Verse 5 begins the exemptions. The officers shall say to the army, has anyone built a new house and not yet begun to live in it? Let him go home, or he may die in battle, and someone else may begin to live in it. If you just built a house, you could go home. Verse 6 continues, has anyone planted a vineyard and not begun to enjoy it? Let him go home, or he may die in battle, and someone else enjoy it. Verse 7 adds, has anyone become pledged to a woman and not married her? Let him go home, or he may die in battle and someone else marry her. Engaged but not yet married? Go home. Then came the most unusual exemption. Verse 8 says, then the officers shall add, is anyone afraid or faint-hearted? Let him go home, so that his fellow soldiers will not become disheartened too. If you're scared, leave. Fear spreads. The approach to warfare depended on location. Verse 10 gives instructions for distant cities. When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. Always offer peace first. Verse 11 continues, if they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. But verse 12 addresses refusal. If they refuse to make peace and they engage you in battle, lay siege to that city. Verse 13 describes the outcome. When the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put to the sword all the men in it. The fighting men died. Verse 14 spares others. As for the women, the children, the livestock, and everything else in the city, you may take these as plunder for yourselves. But Canaanite cities were different. Verse 16 states, however, in the cities of the nations, the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. Do not leave alive anything that breathes. Total destruction. Verse 17 explains which nations. Completely destroy them. The Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Verse 18 gives the reason. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all the detestable things they do in worshipping their gods, and you will sin against the Lord your God. Even in siege warfare, there were limits. Verse 19 addresses trees. When you lay siege to a city for a long time, fighting against it to capture it, do not destroy its trees by putting an axe to them, because you can eat their fruit. Do not cut them down. Are the trees people that you should besiege them? Fruit trees provided food. Destroying them was wasteful. Chapter 21 begins with a disturbing scenario. Verse 1 describes it: "If someone is found slain, lying in a field in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess, and it is not known who the killer was. A body in a field, no witnesses, murder unsolved." Verse 2 gives the procedure. "Your elders and judges shall go out and measure the distance from the body to the neighboring towns." Verse 3 continues, "Then the elders of the town nearest the body shall take a heifer that has never been worked and has never worn a yoke." Verse 4 describes what they did with it: "And lead it down to a valley that has not been plowed or planted, and where there is a flowing stream. There in the valley they are to break the heifer's neck." Then came the declaration. Verse 6 says, "Then all the elders of the town nearest the body shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley." Verse 7 records their words, "And they shall declare, 'Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done.'" A public statement of innocence. Moses then addressed marriage to female captives from war. Verse 10 sets the scenario: "When you go to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands, and you take captives." Verse 11 continues, "If you notice among the captives a beautiful woman and are attracted to her, you may take her as your wife. But there were rules." Verse 12 begins, "Bring her into your home, and have her shave her head, trim her nails." Verse 13 explains the waiting period. "And put aside the clothes she was wearing when captured. After she has lived in your house and mourned her father and mother for a full month, then you may go to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife." A full month of mourning. Next came laws about inheritance when a man had 2 wives. Verse 15 describes the situation. "If a man has 2 wives, and he loves one, but not the other, and both bear him sons, but the firstborn is the son of the wife he does not love." Verse 16 gives the rule: "When he wills his property to his sons, he must not give the rights of the firstborn to the son of the wife he loves, in preference to his actual firstborn, the son of the wife he does not love." Then Moses addressed rebellious sons. Verse 18 describes the case: "If someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey his father and mother and will not listen to them when they discipline him." Verse 19 explains the process. "His father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him to the elders at the gate of his town." Verse 21 gives the outcome. "Then all the men of his town are to stone him to death. You must purge the evil from among you." The chapter ends with a law about executed criminals. Verse 22 says, "If someone guilty of a capital offense is put to death, and their body is exposed on a pole." But verse 23 sets a limit. "You must not leave the body hanging on the pole overnight. Be sure to bury it that same day, because anyone who is hung on a pole is under God's curse." Chapter 22 begins with laws that showed compassion in everyday situations. Verse 1 addresses lost animals. "If you see your fellow Israelites' ox or sheep straying, do not ignore it, but be sure to take it back to its owner. Don't walk past. Help." Verse 2 continues, "If they do not live near you, or if you do not know who owns it, take it home with you and keep it until they come looking for it." Verse 4 addresses another situation. "If you see your fellow Israelites' donkey or ox fallen on the road, do not ignore it. Help the owner get it to its feet." A fallen animal needed assistance. Then came a law about birds. Verse 6 describes the scenario. "If you come across a bird's nest beside the road, either in a tree or on the ground, and the mother is sitting on the young or on the eggs, do not take the mother with the young." Verse 7 explains, "You may take the young, but be sure to let the mother go, so that it may go well with you and you may have a long life." Verse 8 addresses home construction. When you build a new house, make a parapet around your roof, so that you may not bring the guilt of bloodshed on your house if someone falls from the roof. A low wall prevented accidents. Chapter 23 continues with more community laws. Verse 19 forbids charging interest to fellow Israelites. Do not charge a fellow Israelite interest, whether on money or food or anything else that may earn interest. Help your brother without profiting from his need. Chapter 24 continues with practical laws. Verse 6 protects livelihoods. Do not take a pair of millstones, not even the upper one, as security for a debt, because that would be taking a person's livelihood as security. Millstones ground grain into flour. Verses 12 and 13 address taking cloaks as security. If the neighbor is poor and gives you their cloak as a pledge, do not go to sleep with it in your possession. Return their cloak by sunset, so that your neighbor may sleep in it. Dignity in debt collection mattered. Verse 14 protects workers. Do not take advantage of a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether that worker is a fellow Israelite or a foreigner residing in one of your towns. Verse 15 adds urgency. Pay them their wages each day before sunset, because they are poor and are counting on it. Verse 19 addresses harvest practices. When you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. Forgotten sheaves belong to the poor. Chapter 26 brings Moses to a beautiful ceremony that would mark Israel's gratitude. Verse 1 sets the scene. When you have entered the land, the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and have taken possession of it and settled in it. After conquest, after settlement, after the first harvest comes. Verse 2 gives the instruction. Take some of the first fruits of all that you produce from the soil of the land the Lord your God is giving you, and put them in a basket. Then go to the place the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name. Now, the very first produce goes into a basket. Verse 3 describes the presentation. And say to the priest in office at the time, I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come to the land the Lord swore to our ancestors to give us. A formal declaration. Verse 4 continues, the priest shall take the basket from your hands and set it down in front of the altar of the Lord your God. Then comes one of the most profound confessions in Scripture. Verse 5 begins, Then you shall declare before the Lord your God, My father was a wandering Aramean, and he went down into Egypt with a few people and lived there and became a great nation, powerful and numerous. The story of Jacob and his family. Verse 6 continues, But the Egyptians mistreated us and made us suffer, subjecting us to harsh labor. The years of slavery compressed into one sentence. Verse 7 tells of deliverance. Then we cried out to the Lord, the God of our ancestors, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our misery, toil, and oppression. Verse 8 describes the Exodus. So the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great terror and with signs and wonders. Verse 9 brings it to the present. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Verse 10 concludes the confession. And now I bring the first fruits of the soil that you, Lord, have given me. Place the basket before the Lord your God and bow down before him. The offering represents gratitude. Then Moses addressed the tithe. Verse 12 introduces it. When you have finished setting aside 1/10 of all your produce in the 3rd year, the year of the tithe, you shall give it to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied. Every 3rd year the tithe stayed local. The tithe. Verse 13 begins a declaration. Then say to the Lord your God, I have removed from my house the sacred portion and have given it to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, according to all you commanded. a statement of full obedience. Verse 15 is the prayer that follows. Look down from heaven, your holy dwelling place, and bless your people Israel and the land you have given us, as you promised on oath to our ancestors, a land flowing with milk and honey. And Moses and the elders of Israel gave the people specific instructions for the day they would cross the Jordan. Chapter 27, verse 2 begins, When you have crossed the Jordan into the land the Lord your God is giving you, set up some large stones and coat them with plaster. These weren't ordinary stones. They were monuments that would carry an important message. Verse 3 continues, Write on them all the words of this law when you have crossed over to enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Every word of the law had to be written on these plastered stones. This would be a permanent record, visible to everyone. Verse 4 specifies the location. And when you have crossed the Jordan, set up these stones on Mount Ebal, as I command you today, and coat them with plaster. Mount Ebal was the place, but that wasn't all they would do on Mount Ebal. Verse 5 gives another instruction. Build there an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones. Do not use any iron tool on them. The altar had to be made of uncut stones, natural, untouched by human tools. Verse 7 adds, Sacrifice fellowship offerings there, eating them, and rejoicing in the presence of the Lord your God. They would eat together, celebrating before God. Then came the most important part. Verse 8 says, And you shall write very clearly all the words of this law on these stones you have set up, very clearly. No ambiguity. Then Moses gave instructions for a ceremony between two mountains. Verse 12 specifies, When you have crossed the Jordan, these tribes shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. 6 tribes on Mount Gerizim. Verse 13 names the others. And these tribes shall stand on Mount Ebal to pronounce curses, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. The Levites would pronounce specific curses. Verse 15 begins, Cursed is anyone who makes an idol, a thing detestable to the Lord, the work of skilled hands, and sets it up in secret. The people respond, Amen. Verse 16 continues, Cursed is anyone who dishonors their father or mother. Amen. The curses covered boundary theft, misleading the blind, withholding justice, sexual immorality, secret murder, and accepting bribes. The final curse in verse 26 was comprehensive. Cursed is anyone who does not uphold the words of this law by carrying them out. And all the people said, Amen. Chapter 28 begins with the blessings that would come from obedience. Verse 1 sets the condition. If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. Complete obedience would elevate Israel above every other nation. Verse 2 promises, All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. The blessings would follow them wherever they went. Verse 3 begins listing them. You will be blessed in the city and blessed in the country. Urban and rural life, both blessed. Verse 4 continues, The fruit of your womb will be blessed, and the crops of your land and the young of your livestock, the calves of your herds and the lambs of your flocks, children, crops, and livestock, all flourishing. Verse 6 declares, You will be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out. Every movement blessed. Verse 7 addresses their enemies. The Lord will grant that the enemies who rise up against you will be defeated before you. They will come at you from one direction, but flee from you in 7. Unified enemy attacks would result in scattered retreats. Verse 9 establishes their identity. The Lord will establish you as his holy people, as he promised you on oath, if you keep the commands of the Lord your God and walk in obedience to him. Holy people, set apart, belonging to God. Verse 10 describes the result. Then all the peoples on earth will see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they will fear you. Verse 12 continues, the Lord will open the heavens, the storehouse of his bounty, to send rain on your land in season, and to bless all the work of your hands. You will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none. Rain at the right time, wealth enough to lend without needing to borrow. Verse 13 concludes, the Lord will make you the head, not the tail. If you pay attention to the commands of the Lord your God that I give you this day, and carefully follow them, you will always be at the top, never at the bottom. Leadership, not subservience. The tone shifts dramatically in verse 15. However, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am giving you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. Disobedience brought the opposite of everything just promised. Verse 16 mirrors the earlier blessings. You will be cursed in the city and cursed in the country. No safe place. Verse 18 reverses the fertility blessings. The fruit of your womb will be cursed, and the crops of your land, and the calves of your herds, and the lambs of your flocks. Verse 20 intensifies. The Lord will send on you curses, confusion, and rebuke in everything you put your hand to, until you are destroyed and come to sudden ruin because of the evil you have done in forsaking him. Confusion and failure in every endeavor. Verse 22 lists afflictions. The Lord will strike you with wasting disease, with fever and inflammation, with scorching heat and drought, with blight and mildew, which will plague you until you perish. 7 different afflictions. Verse 23 uses vivid imagery. The sky over your head will be bronze, the ground beneath you iron. No rain from the bronze sky, no growth from the iron ground. Verse 25 addresses warfare. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You will come at them from one direction but flee from them in 7, and you will become a thing of horror to all the kingdoms on earth. Instead of victory, humiliating defeat. Verse 36 describes the ultimate curse, exile and foreign rule. The Lord will drive you and the king you set over you to a nation unknown to you or your ancestors. There you will worship other gods, gods of wood and stone. The king would go into exile with the people. Verse 37 continues, you will become a thing of horror, a byword, and an object of ridicule among all the peoples where the Lord will drive you. Other nations would use Israel as an example of failure. Verse 49 introduces an invading army. The Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the ends of the earth, like an eagle swooping down, a nation whose language you will not understand. An unknown language, a distant enemy. Verse 52 describes the siege. They will lay siege to all the cities throughout your land until the high fortified walls in which you trust fall down. The walls they trusted would crumble. Then comes one of the most horrific prophecies. Verse 53 describes the desperation. Because of the suffering your enemy will inflict on you during the siege, you will eat the fruit of the womb, the flesh of the sons and daughters the Lord your God has given you. Parents would eat their own children during the siege. Verse 64 describes the scattering. Then the Lord will scatter you among all nations, from one end of the earth to the other. There you will worship other gods, gods of wood and stone, which neither you nor your ancestors have known. Dispersed worldwide. Verse 65 promises no peace even in exile. Among those nations you will find no repose, no resting place for the sole of your foot. There the Lord will give you an anxious mind, eyes weary with longing, and a despairing heart. Constant anxiety. Verse 67 adds, in the morning you will say, if only it were evening, and in the evening, if only it were morning, because of the terror that will fill your hearts and the sights that your eyes will see. Chapter 29 begins with Moses summoning all Israel. Verse 1 states, "These are the terms of the covenant the Lord commanded Moses to make with the Israelites in Moab, in addition to the covenant he had made with them at Horeb." This was a second covenant, complementing the one at Sinai. Verse 2 has Moses addressing them. Moses summoned all the Israelites and said to them, "Your eyes have seen all that the Lord did in Egypt to Pharaoh, to all his officials, and to all his land." They witnessed everything firsthand. Verse 4 adds something profound. "But to this day, the Lord has not given you a mind that understands, or eyes that see, or ears that hear." Despite seeing miracles, they still struggled to understand. Verse 9 gives the charge. "Carefully follow the terms of this covenant, so that you may prosper in everything you do." Verse 10 describes who was present. "All of you are standing today in the presence of the Lord your God, your leaders and chief men, your elders and officials, and all the other men of Israel." Verse 12 explains why. "You are standing here in order to enter into a covenant with the Lord your God, a covenant the Lord is making with you this day and sealing with an oath, a formal covenant ceremony." But verse 14 expands the scope. "I am making this covenant with its oath, not only with you." Verse 15 continues, "Who are standing here with us today in the presence of the Lord our God, but also with those who are not here today." Future generations were included. Verse 19 describes self-deception. When such a person hears the words of this oath and they invoke a blessing on themselves, thinking, "I will be safe even though I persist in going my own way," they will bring disaster on the watered land as well as the dry. Someone thinking they can serve God while following their own desires. Chapter 30 offers hope after the dire warnings. Verse 1 begins, "When all these blessings and curses I have set before you come on you, and you take them to heart wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations." Even in exile, there would be opportunity for restoration. Verse 2 describes what must happen. "And when you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and with all your soul according to everything I command you today." A wholehearted return to God. Verse 3 promises restoration. "Then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you and gather you again from all the nations where he scattered you." God would bring them back. Verse 6 speaks of transformation. "The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul, and live." God would change their hearts internally. Then Moses addresses how accessible God's commands are. Verse 11 says, "Now what I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach." The law wasn't impossible. Verse 14 gives the answer, "No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, so you may obey it." God's word was already with them. Then comes the most famous passage. Verse 15 declares, "See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction." Two clear options. Verse 19 makes it formal. "This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses." Then Moses makes his recommendation. "Now choose life, so that you and your children may live." Verse 20 explains what choosing life means. "And that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. For the Lord is your life, and he will give you many years in the land he swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Chapter 31 begins Moses' final actions. Verse 2 continues, "He said to them, I am now 120 years old, and I am no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan." Moses acknowledged his limitations. Verse 7 has Moses commissioning Joshua publicly. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him, in the presence of all Israel, "Be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance." Moses then addressed the priests. Verse 9 says, "So Moses wrote down this law and gave it to the Levitical priests, who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and to all the elders of Israel." The written law was entrusted to the priests. Then the Lord appeared to Moses and Joshua. Verse 14 records, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Now the day of your death is near. Call Joshua and present yourselves at the tent of meeting, where I will commission him.'" Verse 19 gives Moses a final task. "Now write down this song and teach it to the Israelites, and have them sing it, so that it may be a witness for me against them." A song that would testify against Israel when they turned away. Chapter 32 contains the song Moses taught them. The song recounts God's faithfulness and Israel's rebellion through 43 verses, calling heaven and earth as witnesses. That same day, the Lord spoke to Moses. Verse 49 of chapter 32 continues, "Go up into the Abarim range, to Mount Nebo in Moab, across from Jericho, and view Canaan, the land I am giving the Israelites as their own possession." God gave Moses one final assignment: climb the mountain and look at the promised land. Verse 50 delivers the hard truth. "There on the mountain that you have climbed, you will die and be gathered to your people, just as your brother Aaron died on Mount Hor and was gathered to his people." Moses would die on the mountain. Verse 52 concludes, "Therefore you will see the land only from a distance. You will not enter the land I am giving to the people of Israel. See it, but never enter it." Chapter 34 records the end. Verse 1 begins, "Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land." Well, Moses made the climb and saw everything, from north to south, east to west. The entire promised land spread before his eyes. Verse 4 records God's words. "Then the Lord said to him, 'This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it.'" Verse 5 tells what happened next. "And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said, until, after 120 years, Moses' life ended." Verse 6 adds a mysterious detail. "He buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor, but to this day no one knows where his grave is." God himself buried Moses, and the location remained secret. Verse 7 describes Moses at death. "Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. Even at 120, he was still physically strong." Verse 8 records the mourning. "The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, until the time of weeping and mourning was over." 30 days of national mourning. Verse 9 introduces the new leader. "Now Joshua son of Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses." The transition was complete. The book ends with a tribute to Moses. Verse 10 declares, "Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face." No other prophet had Moses' unique relationship with God. Verse 12 concludes, "For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel." Moses stood alone in Israel's history. If this journey through Deuteronomy opened your eyes to something you'd never seen before in this ancient book, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next deep dive into Scripture. Share this video with someone who needs to hear Moses' final message, because these stories aren't just history, they're an invitation to understand the heart of God and his plan for his people. The book of Deuteronomy ends with Moses' death, but the story of God's faithfulness? That story continues. and you're part of it.